David MacNaughton is a former Canadian ambassador to the U.S. Thank you very much for being with us, David. And I want to start with just the unexpected nature of this. We are dealing with a president who's not afraid to use tariffs, even when they cause harm to his own industries. So in terms of our federal government response, how do we respond to the unpredictability of this trading partner?
Well, I think, I think President Trump is entirely predictable in his unpredictability. So you have to be prepared at all times for actions that people would normally think are not very clever, but particularly in this pre-election or in this election environment, you can expect them to do these kinds of things. I mean, it really is ridiculous in that the United States does not produce enough of its own aluminum that it consumes. And so it is going to have to import aluminum from somewhere. And by putting tariffs on Canadian aluminum, you either are going to increase the cost to Canadian consumers or U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses, or you're going to actually have places like Russia and China displace Canadian aluminum. None of those is a particularly attractive alternative. I think what Minister Freeland said this morning, and I totally support where she's headed on this, is we are going to do dollar for dollar retaliation. I think it's really important that we consult with Canadian industry before imposing those tariffs to make sure that they have the effect of causing the U.S. some pain and minimizing the pain for Canadian industry. And I think that's going to take some consultation, and that's why the tariffs aren't actually going to be in place. Our retaliatory tariffs aren't going to be in place until the middle of September.
Part of what makes the tariffs so offensive, if I can use that word, David, is the invoking of Section 232, as the president did last time. To your point, ironically, it may actually see them reach out to countries that are actually security risks. What can we do to ensure that there isn't an actual abuse of trade sections like this? I mean, it's the absurdity of it, I guess. Is there some kind of more formal response we could put in place to avoid this?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we have to get to the point where this kind of absurd action by using the national security risk, the 232, just doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I tried when I was in Washington to work with certain members of Congress on both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, to actually put some oversight on the president's use of this, to make sure that it had to go through Congress, and to try to get sort of a blanket exemption for Canada. We weren't successful in that, but because we stood up to the Americans, we were tough, we did take the retaliatory measures, they eventually backed down, and they will back down in this case. I think for the long term, what the government of Canada is going to have to do after the election, regardless of the outcome, is to engage in a discussion with the Americans about defense and security, where if they expect us to play the role that they do expect us to play in the defense of North America and in the defense of freedom around the world, they're going to just have to stop using 232 against us, because it is an insult to Canadians. It's just not, if they want to try and take action under NAFTA, or they want to go to the WTO or whatever, there's a process for doing that. But this kind of arbitrary use of this is an insult to the strongest ally that the United States of America has. And it really is, the word ally seems not to be something that is regarded highly by this administration, and I find it very disappointing.
So obviously disappointment will lead us to these retaliatory measures. David, what form should they take? I mean, the concern always is that, imposing them while you can see it's sort of a satisfying response may actually harm Canadian businesses. How do we maneuver through that?
Yeah, I think it's a very tricky exercise. I think what you've got to do is to try to look at all of the various the various items on which we could impose tariffs, and to balance them on the one hand to try to make sure that they have the biggest political impact in the states that the president cares about, and secondly, where there's going to be the least impact in Canada. And under a normal economic circumstance, that would be reasonably, I wouldn't say simple to do, but it would be less challenging to do than facing the economy that we have at the present moment, because anything you do that is going to, cause any workers to be laid off in Canada is something that you're going to have to be very sensitive to. And that's why, I think during the NAFTA negotiations, we were able to establish a really good working relationship with industry, with labor, with the provinces. So there was kind of a collaborative view about how we would do things like retaliation. And I think Minister Freeland's trying to do the same thing. I know that people like Premier Ford and the rest of the premiers have been very supportive and collaborative in terms of dealing with this unconventional, shall we say, U.S. administration, and I think that it's going to be tricky. But I know that what we will do is try to inflict the most amount of pain on them with the least amount of pain to either Canadian consumers or Canadian industry. Challenging, but I think we've got some really talented people, and if we work collaboratively with industry, I think we can do the job.
Is it a stretch to say, or even to have the perception, that after all of the hard work that went into the new NAFTA, there's some weak spots here if this kind of thing can rear its head?
I've said ever since we negotiated the agreement is that the new NAFTA agreement is essential. And it was a necessary building block, but it doesn't solve all our problems. We're still going to have, and regardless of who wins the election, we're going to have flare-ups of protectionism in the United States. We're going to have Buy America things at the state level. We're going to have, this is not something that we could say, okay, we got a new agreement, it's all over, we've got unfettered access to the United States market. That's not the case. It was an essential element to maintain our access and to create an environment wherein people could have confidence investing in Canada. But there's, this is an ongoing battle that we're going to have to maintain. One of the things that you probably have seen is that a significant part of the U.S. aluminum industry is opposed to what President Trump is doing. It's really one company. It's Century that is a subsidiary of Glencore that is geared all of this up. And I think that's the other trick is we not only have to have Canadian business and Canadian labor and Canadian politicians behind us. We need to continuously find ways in which we're going to get U.S. business and U.S. politicians to be supportive of freer trade.